open borders, shameful abandonment, disregard for human life, the prospect of more mandates and lockdowns, and the list goes on. Now more than ever, we need to stick together. Voting alone is not enough. We must use our dollars to support like-minded companies that fight for our rights and beliefs. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider who shares your values. Last year, we gave more than $500,000 to conservative causes. With your support, we'll give more than $1.5 million this year. It's time to band together and support companies that truly love America and fight for our freedoms. Will you join us?
This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Hello, Kentuckiana. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson of the Louisville Tea Party and the Kentucky Liberty Caucus. You're listening today on Kentucky's Voice. You're probably listening right now on 970 AM. You can also reach us at various destinations online where you can see a video podcast of our show today. First is Facebook Live. If you have Facebook, go to Kentucky's Voice. There are two, so just search for the Kentucky's Voice that has the most followers, and there's a live stream going on there. You can also go to YouTube to the Kentucky's Voice channel. You'll be able to click on the live button and find our live broadcast, and there will be an archived copy of that whole video there afterward. If you want to watch this show on TV, if you have Spectrum TV, we are on WBNA, which is channel 21 on Spectrum, and our broadcast is usually at 12:30, 4, and 8 p.m., so you have that option of watching that video podcast at any of those times following up. And then we also want to point to our website. Our website is kyvoice.org. That's kyvoice.org. You can go to that website, find links to most of those different options that I just described to you, but there's also a donate button. We are listener supported. If you want to keep conservative talk about Louisville and Louisville area, the collar counties, as well as Kentucky state politics mostly, you can support our, I call it a ministry, but you can support our programming here by clicking on that donate button and then adjusting the percentages about how much you want to give to the payment processor, all that details. But we would certainly support certainly appreciate your support. Okay, and remember, we are on every day at 11 a.m. to noon during the weekdays, so Monday through Friday, with various hosts, Jim Waters, Andrew Cooper Ryder, Tom Fallbush, and Bob Scott in particular. So we would enjoy your company on your drive-in from work or maybe your lunch hour at work, 11 a.m. to noon. Okay, let's talk very quickly about some national or, some broader things that happened this week. We have an ongoing military operation / war with Iran that is continuing to progress. It's not clear when that is going to conclude or whether it might escalate into boots on the ground. So that's obviously the number one thing happening. There was a little bit of controversy online with Robert Mueller, the person who led the investigation into Trump that was tied in with one of his impeachments. He did pass away, and Trump, I don't know how to describe it. He had a coarse response to being pleased that Robert Mueller had died. Obviously, sympathies to Robert Mueller's family. People didn't vote for Trump for his gentility online. He certainly mean tweets quite often. The other big event that happened this week on Monday was the first Republican primary debate for the U.S. Senate, which featured Daniel Cameron, Andy Barr, and Nate Morris. That was put on by WDRB News as well as one of the Lexington TV channels. So I hope that you followed that. My summary of that proceeding was that for a first debate, it was extremely spirited and angry. I only expect that tone to escalate from here. We have about 7 weeks until the primary, and I expect that there will be lots of digs among those top three, especially. My expectation is that I will have an endorsement, my personal endorsement in that race on next week's show. So I ask you to tune in. We'll start off with maybe 30 seconds worth of discussion after the break. Come on back and join us. We will have Candy Massaroni, representative for Nelson County, on for the rest of the show.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus, as well as the Louisville Tea Party. We thank you for joining us. If you are joining us anticipating coverage of Louisville women's basketball, we are the home at WGTK of Louisville women's basketball. I believe that coverage is going to start at 11:30, maybe a little afterward. But before that, we hope you join us to hear some discussion of what's going on in our General Assembly, what laws are going to be passed that are going to affect you. So it's my honor to bring on our guest for today. Her name is Candace Massaroni. Everyone calls her Candy. So Candy Massaroni. She is a state representative for District 50, which is basically Nelson County. I think it's just Nelson County. So if we can bring on Candy Massaroni. All right.
Hi, thanks for having me, Lance. And it actually is just Candy. It's not Candace, so it's Candy Massaroni. Yes.
I did not know that. Okay,
yeah.
That's great. All right, so Candy Massaroni, just tell us a little bit about your background. You have a very interesting political background, a veteran, you're a mom. Just tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into all the bills and all the things that have kept you busy this session.
Yeah, so I've really had no aspirations to get into politics before 2020. I came from a military background. My husband and I both are retired Air Force veterans, and after I retired, I was working for the Air Force as in recruiting. So I done that for several years. And then 2020 hit and a lot of the mandates were happening and it was insanity to me. So I ended up losing my job and I decided, if I want change, I got to be a part of the change. And that's when I decided to jump into politics.
That's right. That's a great story. Now, don't let the name fool you, Candy. She's actually one of the most conservative legislators up there, and I think she's very proud of that designation. We actually saw each other on Friday when you were a partial MC. You introduced several speakers, at least, at the Nelson County Lincoln Day dinner. Who was speaking at that event, and how did you think that went?
No, it was a great turnout. I think we had over 140 people, so the turnout was amazing. We had some speaker issues, unfortunately, but from the microphone. But I introduced Daniel Cameron and I introduced Jimmy Higdon, who has been an absolute legend in Kentucky politics, and he's been a mentor to many of us. And this was his last Lincoln dinner as a state senator. And then I also had a privilege of introducing Thomas Massey.
Okay. All right.
We had most of the candidates there from the U.S. Senate race.
Yeah.
or at least Representative Michael Ferris wasn't there, but he did have someone there speaking on his behalf. So
that's right. And so Nate Morris was there. He spoke briefly. Andy Barr as well. And then Ed Gowrine, who's challenging Thomas Massey for that seat. So a lot of great speakers, met a lot of patriots there. And so it was a great event. Thank you for doing your part for that.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And like always, Daniel Cameron, he has a special place in my heart. So I was thrilled to introduce him as well. So
yeah. And I know you've endorsed him.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about like if somebody, and so I usually do at the very end of the show, how do I get in touch with this representative, or how do I give to their campaign? Let's do that right up front. If we want to have someone give to your campaign or reach out and find out more about your platform and the things that you stand for, where do they go to do that?
Yeah, so it's candy5050.com is my website. My telephone number is published everywhere. It's kind of I'm probably one of the only reps that publishes their cell phone number, but it's out there. So it's 502-510-1464 is my cell.
Okay.
And then, Facebook and on X, it's Candy Massaroni on X and Candy Massaroni on Facebook as well. So
okay. So, and that's Massaroni, Massaroni. You can go to her website, candy50.com. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start off with last year. I believe this was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, but you passed a bill called Ian's Law. And so people maybe have already heard, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, there was an Ian alert for a child that was missing. Unfortunately, they found that child deceased, but nevertheless, there was an Ian alert. You were actually the person most responsible for getting that, the availability of something called an Ian alert passed. So tell me a little bit about what that is and what was involved in getting that law passed.
So we've actually had 3 Ian alerts in Kentucky since it was enacted after last session. 2 of those have not turned out like we wanted, but one of them, what turned out, it was about 2 weeks ago, and they found the child. So what an Ian alert is, it's an alert for any children with disabilities, autism, those types of things that doesn't meet an Amber Alert, but they're absolutely in danger.
Right.
So it notifies the people in the local area that there is a child that could be in danger in that area that has a disability of some sort.
Right. And so often these kids actually are at higher risk because even when they're found, sometimes they have difficulties communicating.
They do. And I did a lot of research when I was doing this bill. Ian's grandmother, Rhonda, had approached me. They lost their son. It's named after a little boy that lost his life in northern Kentucky. He wandered into the Ohio River. So after I started doing some research, and it seems like I think it was 80% of the kids with autism, they tend to be drawn to water.
Oh.
So usually that's where they end up going. So this is just something that alerts the community immediately to look around bodies of water and sheds or anything to try to get these kids home quickly. So
right. Well, it sounds like a great law. It's targeted to a very specific situation, a lost child who has a disability or autism. And so thank you for getting that passed. You actually collaborated a little bit with our current Jefferson County Clerk, David Yates, across the aisle in order to get that. So, which is a little fascinating. Usually Republicans and Democrats are like cats and dogs up there, but you worked well with him on that one.
Well, sometimes his bill was moving out of the Senate.
Yeah.
This is a bill that I definitely wanted to get through. So he allowed me to use his bill as a vehicle to get Ian's alert attached to his, I think it's DeShante alert.
Yeah.
So he allowed me, and it worked out well. And I appreciate him working with me on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let me go ahead and talk about another bill that you have filed this time called Landon's Law. Yes. Again, it's another law to try to help with a problem with children. So tell me a little bit about Landon's Law. This is HB 335 if you want to call in to 1-800-372-7181 and tell all the representatives that you want to see this law passed. This is HB 335, Landon's Law. Go ahead.
So most of my bills do come from constituents, and this one
Mm-hmm.
came from Landon McCovern's mother. He was an 8-year-old boy that died in one of our local schools by choking on a bouncy ball. We had paramedics on the scene during the time, and we had a nurse on the scene. They done everything they could. They done the Heimlich remover. They did everything. So what this bill will allow is the anti-choking devices like LifeVac to be in the schools. It's not mandating them. It would allow them. It would take the liability from the schools if there was no other choice. After they do the Heimlich remover, they would be able to use this to get the child breathing again. Unfortunately, this bill has had some unusual opposition. Again, last year it got through the House, no problem. And then this year, I expected to get through the House this week. We've got it through committee the first week of session.
Okay, good.
Hopefully we'll get it. But one of the gentlemen in the Heimlich's family is opposing this legislation, and he's been very active about opposing this legislation. I'm not completely for sure his reasoning. First, it was an FDA approved, but now the device actually got FDA approved as a secondary device last week. So I'm hoping there's less opposition to it, but it's the last resort. So if a child can't breathe, I mean, I would do anything, even if it wasn't FDA approved. The device works. It's saved many lives. And another aspect of this bill, there's a lot of children that can't receive the Heimlich remover. They have medical conditions. They're wheelchair bound. So a lot of the ADA groups have been pushing for this legislation as well.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's kind of wild.
It's interesting. You never know in Frankfurt who's going to oppose a piece of legislation. So
well, we only have a little bit of time in this segment. Let me get a bill that maybe we won't have too much discussion on. This is HB 876 on smart meters. A lot of people are getting smart meters installed that they really have no ability to deny. So what does 876 do, and what is the issue that you're trying to address there?
Yeah, so that bill is, again, a constituent. A lot of constituents came to me concerned about the smart meters. This would simply allow residents to opt out of those.
Okay.
And to, I think some of the people that's opting out of those are getting charged, even if they can opt out of it, they're getting charged extra fees. So that would remove the extra fees they get.
Okay. So this would allow you to basically stay with an analog meter. So, and this is the concern I hear from constituents is, if this is all digitized, the government or some other entity, maybe the power company is going to be able to turn off my power because I'm a little bit late on a bill, and I could be stuck with no electricity or no power during the winter months or whatever. So, whereas if it's an analog, maybe I'll just get charged a fee after the storm is over. So this is actually a concern I've heard on the ground quite a bit. And
there's a lot of concerns. I mean, some people are concerned about the health and safety reasons of it.
Yeah.
So this is just a really simple piece of legislation.
Yeah.
So. All
right. Well, after the break, we're going to talk about a piece of legislation that Candy actually discussed on the floor, I believe, last week. So that is called the Crystal Rogers Act. I'm sure many people have heard the name Crystal Rogers. We'll talk about that after the break. Join us. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice, and get ready to listen to some coverage of Louisville women's basketball.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and the Louisville Tea Party. I'm joined today with a special guest, and that is State Representative Candy Massaroni. She represents House District 50, which is Nelson County. Now, the bill that we're going to talk about to begin this segment is one that she actually was able to talk about on the House floor this past week, I believe. It did pass the House. It's moved over to the Senate. So when you call in and support this bill at 1-800-372-7181, you will want to reference either the Crystal Rogers Act or HB 305 that you want to move forward. So the Crystal Rogers Act, I think a lot of our listeners have heard the name Crystal Rogers. They may have even, maybe they watched one of those real crime documentaries that have been on TV over the last, 5 or 6 years talking about the Crystal Rogers case. So why don't you give us some background about Crystal Rogers, who was from Nelson County, and just tell us a little bit about what was her background story, and then we can get into what this legislation would do.
So I think it was maybe back in 2015. I don't know the year for sure. It
was a while ago,
a while back. Crystal disappeared on 4th of July weekend. I do want to stop and say her mother, Sherry Ballard, is probably one of the strongest women I've ever met. After Crystal disappeared, the father, Tommy Ballard, went out looking for Crystal. He ends up getting murdered in a hunting, he was going hunting and he got murdered. But the Crystal Rogers Act is, during all the trials and the investigations, the Houck family that got accused and ultimately sentenced for murder.
Mm-hmm. That was her boyfriend.
It was the boyfriend. Yep. They found out later, after an FBI search, that the whole family had recorded grand jury testimony, and they had used that the recordings to compare notes with each other. Okay. So what this bill is, and this is really, it could go with many cases. It's to protect the grand jury secrecy.
Right.
These are life and death situations. If somebody, you're doing an investigation on a drug dealer and somebody leaks who's telling, whatever,
exactly.
They could be killed. But this bill it was filed for Crystal Rogers just to protect the grand jury testimonies and to be able to charge people. The current law is that they get 1 year if they, from the time that that happened, that they can be convicted. They didn't find these recordings to many years afterwards. So there was nothing that we could do to convict them in recording the testimonies. And it wasn't one. It was the mother, the sister, the mother's boyfriend. It was the Hope family. The brother had recorded these.
Okay.
And there was absolutely nothing we could do.
So just to clarify, so Crystal Rogers disappeared about 10 years ago. Almost right from the start, people suspected that it was her boyfriend, but they couldn't find enough evidence. They also couldn't find corroborating testimony. And so when the police are investigating a crime and it finally reaches the level where the district attorney or the Commonwealth's attorney wants to prosecute the case, the first thing they have to do is get a grand jury indictment. So the prosecutor will go in before a panel of citizens, and they will essentially present the best evidence that they have of the case in order to convince that person that this person should be put on trial for the crime that they're being accused of. Now, usually the defense does not get the same ability to present their case to the extent that they would in a normal trial. So this is heavily slanted towards the prosecutor. But what generally grand jury testimony is generally sealed. So people who are not in the courtroom are not able to find out all of the evidence that got presented to that grand jury because, number one, it's only really one side of the story. And number two, it's basically a lot of evidence that, that may be eventually disproven in court, but it's also the prosecution's case. They're really laying out the whole case. So if people can record that testimony and then broadcast it to the others, then people that are going to be witnesses are basically getting a preview of the case against the person so that they can line up their stories and basically deceive the person and deceive the actual jury in the eventual trial that will determine their guilt or innocence. So currently the law reads that if a person records grand jury testimony, which is generally sealed, and then distributes that, there is a 1-year statute of limitation. So they have 1 year. If within 1 year of evidence coming forward that the person illegally recorded grand jury testimony, they can be prosecuted for that. But if it doesn't come out for multiple years after it, nothing can be done to the person. So your bill extends that to 10 years. Is that right? 10 years?
It does. And I suspect that we may have a committee sub next week in the Senate that will increase it to a felony. So there will be no statute of limitations.
Yeah.
So that's what I suspect the committee sub for the Senate will be, which is even better. You know, I went for 10 years just. So, but if we increase this to a felony, it would be, you know, when they find the evidence, they can prosecute it. So,
right. And the goal in all of this is for us to have fair trials. I mean, that's the bottom line. And so we don't want people recording grand jury testimony, taking it to all the other witnesses and getting, working out their story ahead of time so that they can deceive an actual jury.
Yeah, and there's actually been cases of, you know, leaks from the grand jury that has led to people getting killed before trials. So there's been several. When I was researching some of the cases in Kentucky, you know, people was accused of things and it gets leaked on who told on them or, you know, who was going to testify against them in trial, and they've ended up missing or killed. So this is just to protect the grand jury's secrecy.
Right. And you mentioned Sherry Ballard earlier. This is Crystal Rogers' mother. She has been in support of this legislation as well. Is that right?
Yeah, she has. She came and testified during a committee, and I think we may have a committee Thursday to get it through the Senate, and she's coming up there. Like I said, she is one of the strongest, most resilient women I have ever met. If I were in her shoes, I just, you never know what you're going to do in that situation, but she has been a complete fighter for her daughter and her husband's legacy.
Okay. All right.
And we actually just put in a resolution to name a road near the Ballard's residence after Tommy and Crystal Ballard here locally.
That'd be great. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to another piece of legislation you filed. This is HB 334. This is the Kentucky Women's Bill of Rights. So tell us a little bit about what this does and why we need this legislation.
This is another one that we've worked on several years. Senator Tishner and I have filed similar pieces of legislation in the House and the Senate. I had someone else run it last year, but it's a very simple piece of legislation. It basically defines what a female is into legislation. And, you know, that I know that sounds crazy. If 10 years ago it would have been, you know, what in the world, but we're at a time where we absolutely need just to define what the definition of a woman is, because we don't have a consistent definition. It just causes legal confusion, conflicting policies, and it's costly lawsuits over things that should not happen. So that's basically what the bill does. And it says that you need to collect data that the state collects according to biological sex. So
So this is one of those bills that it just seems like such common sense. How could this possibly not already be in the law? But it actually does have an impact on a lot of stuff, like who's allowed to use which bathroom, locker rooms, which prison is a person assigned to. And so a man who puts on a dress and says that they're a woman should not be in a women's prison. This would have implications on all of those things. Is that right?
It does. And it really protects, you know, local officials, local jailers. You know, if there's a definition in there, okay, you're not a biological woman, so you cannot. But, you know, if there's no definition and somebody's claiming to be a biological woman, most jailers would, you know, still do the right thing. But this protects them, and it gives them, you know, a KRS to say, no, you are not a biological female. So
now on the radio, I think some of our listeners are going to break away to listen to Louisville women's basketball. Go Cards. But we're going to continue on with Candy Massaroni after the break. If you go to our YouTube or Facebook channels, you'll be able to see the video and listen to all of that commentary as well. Join us after the break on Kentucky's Voice.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. We're joined by Representative Candy Massaroni from Nelson County. That's Kentucky State Representative District 50. If you want to support her candidacy, she actually does have a Democrat challenger. No Republicans challenged her in the primary. But you can give to her campaign at candy5050.com. So candy50.com. Okay, Candy, you filed a lot of legislation this session, so let's talk about a couple more of these bills. HB 81 is one that you filed for multiple years in a row, maybe 3 or 4, actually. At least 3, I think.
I've been in 4 years. I think I fought it every year I've been in the General Assembly.
So HB 81, if you want to call in to 1-800-372-7181, that is the Protect the Guard Act. So tell me what the Protect the Guard Act does and why it's important.
Okay. So, this is actually a bill that TJ Roberts and I have worked on even before he became into the General Assembly. This bill is pretty simple. It just says that we can't send our National Guard to a war without the declaration of Congress. It's constitutional. That it should be the way it is, but that's all the bill says. They can still go train. They can still, a lot of people's like, well, they can't go on missions. They can still do all that. They just can't go into an active war zone without a declaration of war.
Okay, so if the federal government wants to send Kentucky National Guard troops over to a foreign engagement, they would have to have a declaration of war by the U.S. Congress, which is actually what's required by the U.S. Constitution to declare war. It is. Okay.
And, the guards to defend Kentucky, help Kentucky in time of emergencies. And we see more and more of the guards being utilized as active duty. So this is just, puts the distinction in it that, I'm all for, I'm prior military. Like I said, I'm all for military doing what they should do, but
absolutely,
we shouldn't take advantage of our National Guard and use them as a deploying force every time there's a war without a declaration of war.
That's right. Okay. All right. Another piece of legislation that you filed is HB 752. HB 752. This one relates to direct donations for blood deposits. So tell me a little bit about this, like what motivated this and what would this law enact if it were to get passed?
Yeah, this is actually another constituent bill. She was wanting to have a procedure done. She couldn't do a direct blood donation. She had to use what was in the blood bank. So all this would allow individuals to do direct blood donations if they choose, especially a family member
Right.
or So
Yeah.
I'm not sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but a lot of people, they're concerned about, different vaccines or medications that
Yeah.
donors could use. And this just, if they choose to use a family member to donate, they can use that. And it's a very simple bill. It's got blown up into a lot of things that it's not, but it's just simply saying that they could have a direct blood donor.
Yeah. Well, it seems common sense. If you wanted to get blood donation from a relative rather than just some random person that gave blood on the street, it seems like you should be able to do that. I'm a little surprised this isn't part of the law.
Yeah, there is some policies. I think it's like 3 days. It's a lot of hoops and bureaucratic stuff you have to go through if you want to do a direct blood donation.
Yeah. And so we're not endorsing that a person getting a vaccine, for example, I imagine that's part of the conspiracies that are out there, that if someone got the COVID vaccine or whatever, their blood donation isn't as good as someone else's. I'm very skeptical that that's the case, but nevertheless,
no, and it's just
yeah, we don't have to subscribe to those sorts of theories to just say, I want to have my relative who I know, and I know that they're not engaging in high risk activity or anything else, rather than someone checking a box on a form that says they haven't been doing that to give me blood for my surgery that's upcoming.
And that's simply what it is.
Yeah.
For whatever reasons, we should be able to choose. If the blood matches, if you're a good donor, you should be able to choose who you want the donation to come from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Another bill that you filed is HB 610. And the theme on all of these are pretty much common sense, and they're tackling some very specific problems that especially affect people in our district. HB 610 is on teacher compensation. So tell me what that bill does, and what is it that you're trying to address by that?
This is another constituent bill. I've got a pretty good relationship with a group of educators in my district, and actually a couple other districts that reach out to me. And by the current KRS, they should have 250 minutes of planning time a week. And that's, grading papers, doing lesson plans. But unfortunately, a lot of things get planned during that time, or they end up having to go and cover another teacher. So they're taking this work home. They're not being able to adequately do lesson plans. So all this it's kind of an incentive for them to kind of let them have their planning period. If they do not get their planning period, the local school administration, the local school district would have to compensate them for that.
Right.
Very simple. I don't see an issue, with it. I think it would incentivize the local school districts to do the right thing and allow these teachers to get their planning time.
Right. So if basically the designated non-instructional planning time that teachers are essentially guaranteed, if those get taken away because they have to do something, they have to supervise kids, I don't know, in the lunchroom or whatever it is, recess, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this would provide for compensation for those teachers in that situation. Is that right?
It would. And I also have another bill. It's similar to this, and I don't have the number on me, but it would force the administration, the central office, to come and substitute, which would kind of protect the planning period. They would have to put so many hours. Each central office person would have to be in a classroom so many hours per week. That would, that helps with this piece of legislation, but it would also help with, the shortage in the subs and everything. As we know, many of the administration's staff has grown tremendously as the teachers have not grown as much. So this would be another way to help those teachers.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We got a couple more pieces of legislation that maybe you want to address.
Sure.
HB 914 is a Protection of Children Act. What this does is it provides some safeguards for families when they're dealing with child welfare agencies. So I know on the ground I hear a lot about social workers coming out to houses, to examine the living conditions for children that are being monitored by Child and Protective Services, for example. So could you just talk a little bit about what HB 914 does? Yeah.
This is something Representative Josh Callaway and I have worked on.
Right.
And it would just, it would force the social workers to wear video cameras while they're doing interviews with children or families. And really it's protect both of them. It's to protect the families and it's to protect the social workers. Again, it's a very common sense piece of legislation. There's always accusations going both ways. So this would just, it would eliminate all that because everything would be recorded on a video.
Yeah. Now I have to admit I haven't read this piece of legislation, but would the idea be that the family is going to have access to this, the video? Who is going to have access to that video that the social worker would have to have on? But basically, them having a body camera on. Before
the courts would be able to take a child away from the family, they would have that video to review.
Okay.
So it would be for the courts before they take away a child from a family. I think our ultimate goals is to keep children with their families. I know there's many situations where you can't do that, but just taking a person's word and taking a child away from the family, this would just, again, protect both parties, and it would allow the judge to review from a non-biased standpoint of what the situation really is from the body camera.
And I think whenever this is a requirement for police officers, the end result is that the police officers actually prefer it. They want to have those body cameras on because it provides them with video evidence that almost all the time they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so they face false accusations all the time. I suspect the same response would happen if we approve this for social workers. Is that how you see it?
Oh, absolutely. It will protect both parties, the cabinet and the families. So
okay, all right.
I know the cost is. We were looking at the cost. I think to buy the cameras would be a little expensive, but I think the payoff would be tremendous.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then one more bill that I have is HB 848. This is dealing with the processing of deceased persons. So a person in your family dies.
Yeah.
This would allow the next of kin to have more control on whether or not the person gets an autopsy. Is that it? And what motivated
and this? Again, was another constituent bill. I had a local family. Their daughter passed away actually in the Jefferson County area. And they wanted a independent autopsy, and it was denied by the coroner, local coroner. So this would say if a family wants an independent autopsy, they would pay for it out of their own money, but they could definitely have it. So
okay. Again, this is
very simple piece of legislation.
Yeah. This is one of those things that I'm shocked this isn't the law already. If the family is willing to pay for an autopsy, why would they not be able to get an autopsy to find out why their family member died? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's very simple, and I fought it every year. I think the coroners have reached out to me, and I think the association is going to help me move it possibly next year. They want it reworded a little bit, and I'd be happy to work with them. But again, it's a constituent piece of legislation, something that happened to a constituent, and like I said, most of my bills come from my constituents. They bring these issues forward, and we just try to do. You don't know what's broken until they bring it forward. Then you just try to fix it.
That's right. Okay. And we could talk about two pieces of legislation that you're co-sponsoring. I believe you filed when we had Josh Callaway on, and you mentioned him that you work with him often. Mm-hmm. One of the pieces of legislation was dealing with Medicaid prescribing psychotropic drugs to children. So can you tell us a little bit about that bill and what motivated it?
Yeah, it's just, I think it's a common sense piece of legislation. I just think there should be more safeguards on prescribing some of these drugs to children. And I know Josh probably covered it a lot more. He researched it a lot more, but it's just a very common sense piece of legislation. No children should be on some of these drugs. So the child should be on some of these drugs, and I think they're overused often. I think
that's true. Okay, we're coming up to the end of this segment. You're listening to Kentucky's Voice on 970 AM. Please check out our YouTube channel. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson.
Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson, with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus and the Louisville Tea Party. I'm joined, at least for a few minutes here on our last segment of the show, with Representative Candy Massaroni. That's Massaroni. She represents State House District 50, which is Nelson County, Bardstown, that area. And so she's joined us for the last 3 segments, I believe, talking about a slew of legislation that she sponsored this time, some of which has moved, and hopefully we'll get it all the way through. She's filed several of those bills the last couple of years with varying degrees of success. So, Candy, as we wrap up our segments, can you just talk a little bit about what it's like to be in the legislature? I think this is your 4th session now, if I'm correct.
Yes.
You came from a background as a military veteran, a mom, and so you didn't have a lot of political background before you entered it. So just tell us, if somebody were considering, for example, running for office, they have some issues that they'd like to have addressed, they want to fulfill their civic duty and run for office, what is some of the advice that you would give to them? And what are your impressions as kind of a political outsider who has sometimes bucked the establishment, if I can say that, appropriately, in my opinion? So just talk about your time in the legislature and what your thoughts are on what the experience has been like for you.
Yeah, well, first I would say absolutely do nothing unless you have Jesus Christ in it, and you know you're using Him to guide you on what you should do. You should definitely pray about it and just let the Lord lead you where you want to go. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege to work in the legislature and represent my constituents for the last 4 years. The first couple of sessions were a little different. This one actually has been a really good session. Everybody seems to be working together well, and it's just been a different session. It's been really good. But if I encouraged anybody and everybody, I came out of nowhere. I had no political experience. I was, like I said, a military person, and I've learned a lot. I just think everybody should be involved in the process, even if you don't want to be an elected official. We need people out involved in things. We need Christians. We need prayer warriors involved in everything, because that's the only way we can change our culture is if Christians get involved.
Yeah. Well, and I would add in, we need various experiences. Like we have a broad sampling of different careers in the legislature, but I've many times made the point on this show that we only have arguably two full-time farmers, for example, in our state legislature. I don't know how many military veterans we have in our legislature, but I would be shocked if it were more than, say, 10 out of the 138.
I
So
think so.
we
I
need
think
people
it's
from various backgrounds so that they can start pushing for different ideas and bring different perspectives to it. Is that the way you see it?
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm friends with several of the lawyers up there, and,
Yeah.
I love them. TJ Roberts,
Yeah.
Stephen Doan, there's some great lawyers, but,
Yep.
I do agree with you. We need people that's not in that mind frame to look at things differently than, somebody that came from a legal or political background. So,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
And
I'll,
again, we need Christians. Christians is what's important. We can't change culture without people that love Jesus and that want to get involved. We can't do anything unless they're there in that space,
that's right.
shining the light on things that need to be changed.
And hopefully those people are less swayed by the attraction to power, that they're doing it for the right reasons, and hopefully they're not as swayed by trying to get kickbacks for donors to their campaigns and all the things that your average listener to this program, I'm sure, hates about politics.
Yeah. And one of the things that I'm proud of is when you talk about donors, big donors, political PACs, I don't take political PAC donations. I do, if it's I've got contributions from Rand Paul, I've got contributions from Thomas Massey. That's the only really political PACs that I have taken money from.
Yeah.
So all of my donors has either been grassroots or, friends, family, or self funded.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
And usually the Liberty candidates don't have a lot of money behind them. And
That's right. So as long as you've got some dedicated supporters willing to go out and knock doors and put up signs and be passionate for you.
And I have been blessed with a great team of people in my community that support me and a family that supports me.
All right. Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for joining us today. That's Candy Massaroni, candy50.com if you want to find out more about her and give to her campaign. Thanks for joining us, Candy.
Thank you.
All right. To conclude this show, how much time do we have left, producer? Okay. Why don't we run this video that we have of a discussion of one of the more controversial bills this time. This is SB 199, giving immunity to pesticide, herbicide manufacturers. This was testimony in front of the House committee by one of the organization called the Kentucky Medical Freedom Association. So can we run that video?
My name is Mary Catherine DeLoder, and I'm speaking as a concerned mother and lifelong citizen of the Commonwealth. I'm also a volunteer with the Kentucky Medical Freedom Coalition. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not paid to talk to you today. I'm also not a farmer, but like some of you, I grew up on a farm. I was never the one behind the wheel, but I've ridden shotgun a lot of times in a big green tractor or combine. I have family members whose livelihoods are production agriculture in Kentucky right now. Senate Bill 199 is not about labeling reform. It's total immunity shield for pesticide manufacturers who fail to warn users about known health dangers. You're being told this bill is about farmers, but I want to review the actual bill language with you. There's nothing in there about agriculture or farming. The bill begins by saying any pesticide. Pesticide is defined later on page 6, but it's an umbrella term for pretty much anything that kills: fungicide, herbicide, rodenticide, antimicrobials, etc. Section 1 says that this bill applies to any pesticides registered with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, which is about 14,000 products, or with the EPA under the federal labeling law, FIFRA. And under FIFRA, there are currently around 57,544 registered products. I looked it up in the database just a few days ago. You can look it up too. And this applies to all of those 57,000 products and all new products created in the future. This goes way beyond agriculture. It applies to things that every one of you probably have in your households right now: Lysol, Clorox, any household cleaner that claims to kill germs, flea and tick collars, swimming pool chlorine tablets, wasp spray, weed killer used on playgrounds, mouse poison, DEET-containing mosquito spray, products to kill bugs on the roses in your garden, and it goes on and on. Senate Bill 199 says that if a product has a label approved by the EPA or a label consistent with the most recent human health risk assessment performed under FIFRA, we seem to ignore some of these ors in the bill, which could be decades out of date, you can't hold the manufacturer accountable for failure to warn you when they knew or should have known that the product causes harms not disclosed on the label. You cannot make an informed choice about using a product when you don't have all the facts about that product. This includes products made by numerous foreign companies, like Syngenta, which is owned by the Chinese government. It's not a stretch to say that this bill gives a pass to the Chinese government to develop future products to send here without full disclosure to be sprayed on our children's playgrounds that could cause who knows what harms in the future. The world doesn't exactly have a great track record with things coming out of laboratories in China. Manufacturers say they can't add other warning labels that are not approved by the EPA because this would be misbranding. Manufacturers draft and submit their own labels to the EPA for approval. We can find no instance where the EPA has denied a request from a manufacturer for an updated label. If the request was denied, that would make a great defense in court. If the label was approved for the harm, then there's no failure to warn. Either way, the manufacturer just has to ask. Now, the state of California issue that was mentioned already, the state of California, under their Prop 65, we all kind of like to laugh that California puts a warning label on everything, but they asked to put a warning label on a glyphosate product. The EPA said, well, we don't agree. So they came up with sort of a hybrid label that said, this organization says it causes cancer, but the EPA doesn't. The EPA actually said, okay, we could live with that. You can put that on there. It was Bayer who sued for the state of California, saying that was compelled speech. The EPA did not sue about that label. It was Bayer who sued and said, we don't want to put that on there. The EPA said it's okay. They approved that label. So that was misrepresented here just a moment ago. Bayer, who makes the product that farmers seem most concerned about, is telling investors that they aren't going anywhere. In their March 4th investor presentation, which you can find, Bayer made it clear that they're committed to controlling 40% of the global glyphosate market, quote, with a focus on over-the-top markets in the Americas. Their annual report says they made 2.6 billion euros, and remember, Bayer's a German company, in glyphosate sales in 2025, and they expect to make the same in 26 by, quote, maintaining brand premium. Bayer is using Kentucky farmers as pawns in a global profit strategy and counting on legislators not to notice. So back to the language of the bill. There are some carve-outs that say that the immunity won't apply if the EPA makes a determination of wrongdoing. The issue here is that the EPA appears to have no mechanism to actually make such determinations. The courts are who do that. That section sounds good, but it actually doesn't mean anything because the EPA doesn't do that. And then under that, it says this immunity shall not be interpreted to prohibit a cause of action based on any other provision or doctrine of state law. So there are three main ways that you could bring a claim against a product that has harmed you. The other two, in addition to failure to warn, would be design defect or manufacturing defect, which both might as well not be applicable to these types of products because the product does what it was designed to do, which is kill something. There's not a lot of time to go into detail on that. This bill has been rejected by far more states than have passed it. It's only passed in 2 states. And farmers in those states that have rejected it still have access to the same tools as our farmers here in Kentucky. Our farmers and our families deserve accountability when companies withhold information. Please do not give pesticide manufacturers permission to lie in Kentucky.
Thank you, Ms. DeLoad.
Okay, so that was Mary Catherine DeLauder from the Kentucky Medical Freedom Coalition. She gave what I consider to be an extremely eloquent description of what is wrong with SB 199. I do want to say the House added some language that makes this only relevant to products that are used in production or residential agriculture. So it did slightly improve the bill. Now, what is the other side? Why would this even be a desirable bill for anyone? Well, Kentucky agriculture, as we have spoken about multiple times on this show, thrives because we have excellent climate and we have a variety of different soil qualities. So almost anything you can think of other than tropical fruits will grow in Kentucky easily. However, that means other things that will grow are weeds and things that require herbicide, and insects also thrive here. So production agriculture is largely dependent on some of these chemicals. The question is, at what cost? Are we going to take away the ability of people to sue if a company has hidden or committed fraud? information that it might cause serious illness, I say no, call your legislators.